could. When I arrived at the site, the wind had a different tone, not the ordinary breath of the desert, but a deep hum, as if the stones themselves were breathing. It wasn't the first excavation of my life, yet it made me feel immediately reduced, childish before something that had existed long before we counted time in years. The map, given to me by an anonymous informant, pointed to a forgotten sinkhole inside a depression that nautical charts and satellites pretended not to see. The coordinate was smudged, written and rewritten. It felt almost sinful to pin that place down with numbers. I set up camp at sunset, and on that first night, I heard the dogs from the nearby village barking as if sending warnings not out of fear, but recognition. They knew the place. The locals, those who still live untouched by modernity, always called that ground the womb that never forgets. To them, it was something alive, an ancient throat that eventually opens its mouth. At first, I smiled with condescension, brushing it off as superstition. But archaeology teaches humility, and this site, in just a few hours, charged me for my arrogance. At dawn on the third day, as we cleared the compacted sand, a block emerged with contours that defied our tools. The surface was far too smooth, with grooves that sliced light as if made of metallic filaments untouched by erosion. No one on the team could explain the geometry. Curves intertwined with precise angles impossible for bare hands of that remote era to sculpt. Engraved in relief, I found a repeated figure, an elongated body, tall and narrow, with a stretched head and sharply inclined eyes. It did not resemble human anatomy. It held a posture, an energy that hurt to recognize. When I brushed the first panel clean, I found inscriptions, but not a language as we know it. These were pulses carved into stone, a writing made of rhythms and sequences, as if the writer attempted to translate sound into solid form. Instinctively, I touched one marking with the tip of my finger. The ground vibrated. Not a mechanical tremor, a response, intimate, that traveled through my body from the inside out. My vision pulsed. In flashes of white and sound, I saw fragments, towering shadows, rib-like structures of metal, lights not born from the sun. It was brief, almost like a borrowed memory. When I stepped back, I realized the rest of the team had stopped moving, staring with that same expression of someone who just witnessed something forbidden. I collected samples, photographed everything, recorded the strange noises. The microphones captured sounds that, when amplified, formed patterns resembling heartbeats grouped in odd arrangements. 2 short, 1 long, 3 short, 1 pause. Something like a syntactic rhythm. Our young acoustics specialist ran them through a spectrogram and whispered, "This isn't human." Harsh words. Shortly after, the site administration received a phone call we weren't allowed to hear, and within hours, officials arrived. They demanded documents, scanned the perimeter with equipment I had never seen, and sealed part of the area without ceremony. They cited risk, asserting the operation must be suspended for national security reasons. I dismissed this as the usual conflict between discovery and authority. But deep down, I sensed something else, not just what we saw, but what waited to be rediscovered. My return that night was clandestine. Under the fractured moonlight, I and 2 colleagues dug where the officials had covered with tarps. The fissure we found suggested something massive lay beneath, not buried by accident, but sealed. Entire structures seemed compressed in layers, stacked like memories someone had tried to hide from the ages. We uncovered a narrow passage that released a metallic, cold scent minerals that shouldn't exist at such concentrations in Earth's crust. We descended a staircase, if it could be called that, carved into a material that felt both stony and glass-like. On each step were markings resembling finger impressions from enormous hands. Cameras glitched intermittently. Interference enveloped the place like a veil. At the bottom, We reached a circular chamber whose ceiling dissolved into darkness. In the center, suspended above a pedestal, was an object unlike anything I had ever seen, not a statue, not a mechanism. It was organic and geometric, with veins that pulsed with an inner blue-green glow, making the air feel almost solid. Its presence wasn't merely visual, there was a sensation in the room. An auditory perception without sound, a frequency that settled into the chest. As I approached, the object responded with a modulation, as if acknowledging human proximity. And then, for the first time, I understood without doubt, this object wasn't made for humans. It wasn't made by us. It had been crafted by others, beings who walked the earth long before our species existed. Beings with bodies, minds, and technology. Beings whose intentions never matched our simplistic categories of gods or aliens. They were architects of a world that predated humanity. I collected fragments and samples with gloved hands. During the ascent, more visions washed over me. Tall beings with light-refracting skin, hands capable of shaping matter through harmonics, bioluminescent structures intertwined with living technology. These were not hallucinations. They were records the site projected when touched by consciousness. Over the next day's analysis of the material revealed isotopic compositions impossible under known geological conditions. The fragments bore signatures of atomic-level, engineered fabrication techniques we barely approach today. Either these beings possessed extraordinary knowledge long before humanity, or they brought it with them. Neither possibility comforted the mind. Both shattered everything we believed about our origins. Worse, international silence tightened around us. Documents vanished, servers were wiped, permissions revoked. When institutions fear the truth, they don't debate as a pagum. I stayed awake night after night, tracing the patterns carved into the object. Occasionally, the pulses aligned with my breathing, and something within me shifted. I heard a new sequence that felt like a name without spoken form, a signature. Miriam converted it into numbers. Omar reproduced the frequency. It altered mood, perception, and focus with alarming precision. That night I wrote, "They were not gods, they were others, the architects of a chapter of earth that we erased on purpose. But these stones did not seek worship, they sought remembrance." And someone had to listen without censoring the truth. The artifact we retrieved from that chamber changed everything. Not because of its form, though its geometry defied understanding, but because of what happened once we began to study it. It behaved less like an object and more like a dormant transmitter waiting for the right stimulus to awaken. When I excited it with a low-frequency electromagnetic beam, something occurred that no instrument could fully measure. The artifact responded. At first it vibrated not like solid matter, but like a living membrane quivering inwardly, reorganizing itself in wave patterns, like miniature tectonic plates shifting in perfect harmony. Then the surface emitted a bluish glow, and symbols previously invisible rose slowly as if revealed by light-curved lines connected by geometric nodes. They resembled both a musical score and a star map. I fed the first sequence into a linguistic reconstruction program. The output froze me. Travelers of the cycle, descendants of light, the lineage that shaped the first flesh. For minutes I could not speak. Everything academia insists on: linear evolution, spontaneous emergence of consciousness, isolated development of technology crumbled in front of me. The artifact described beings who existed long before Homo sapiens appeared. Beings who didn't just visit Earth, they shaped it. For weeks, I clung to denial, but the more I compared data, the clearer it became. A civilization predating humanity. Non-human in nature, mastered technologies that didn't obey the boundaries of known physics. Not weapons, not machines, but instruments that manipulated vibration, light, matter, maybe even consciousness. They didn't build with tools. They sang structures into existence. While the team slept, I spent hours trying to replicate the artifact's frequency behaviors. Each sonic pattern triggered different reactions, shifts in air density, temperature drops, fleeting movements in the periphery of vision. At first, I dismissed these as exhaustion, but eventually, the line between perception and memory dissolved. In the third week, I received a message not anonymous this time, but from someone I hadn't seen in years, Leon Vargas, a theoretical physicist exiled from academia for methodological deviations. He somehow knew what we had found before I published anything. His message: "You open the door. Don't let them close it." Vargas sent coordinates to a hidden archive in Armenia where classified military expeditions had uncovered structures similar to ours. Photos showed colossal chambers carved into mountain's pillars like musical organs, corridors whose acoustics could only be explained by intentional harmonic design. Comparing the symbols on those walls to ours, patterns aligned perfectly. These beings had left a distributed culture, spread across the planet. Not visitors, not intruders, inhabitants. The line between ancient and extraterrestrial blurred quickly. They weren't from Earth, but they were of Earth long before we ever were a symbiotic population integrated into planetary cycles. And when they vanished or slept, their memory was sealed under layers of catastrophe, time, and human political fear. The next week, as we prepared a second descent into the chamber, the ground emitted pulses identical to the artifact. They weren't seismic, they were responses. Something deeper than the chamber was awakening. We prepped the descent, but when we arrived, the entire area had been sealed again, this time with security-grade fencing, sensors, armed drones. A small convoy of unmarked vehicles stood nearby. Men in plain uniforms approached us. The same men who had warned us before. "There," Commander said. "You don't understand what you're activating." His tone wasn't protective, it was fearful. Not fear of us, fear of them. We returned to camp shaken. That night, unable to sleep, I grabbed a lantern, the artifact, and a rope, and returned alone. The descent felt longer this time, heavier, as if the earth itself were aware of me. In the lower platform, the air hummed with energy. The lantern flickered and died. In the absolute dark, the only thing perceivable was the pulse. 2 short, 1 long, 3 short. The chamber answered back. When the light returned, I froze. We were not in an empty cavern. We were standing inside a vestibule, a transitional corridor constructed by a civilization that understood architecture beyond anything human. Mineral ribs arched upward. Translucent walls glowed faintly. The ceiling opened into infinity. And in the center stood a figure, a colossal, humanoid sharpie fossilized within a crystalline column. Elongated head, inclined eyes, tall, slender body, stone carved into the stone panels. But it wasn't a sculpture. It was a being, suspended, preserved, waiting, and it was conscious. The artifact in my hand glowed intensely, synchronizing with the chamber. The crystalline pillar disintegrated not violently, but like dust turning into light. Being stepped forward, and the ground stopped vibrating, as if recognizing the return of an emperor. The soldiers were nowhere near, but I felt them, the world, the earth, holding its breath. The being turned to me, not the chamber, not the world, me. And a voice, wordless yet perfectly clear, filled my mind. "You are not the first, but you will be the one who remembers." Time fell upon me like a wave. Visions cascaded, cities of living light, ecosystems engineered with sound, ancient skies burning with unfamiliar constellations. I saw their rise. I saw the rupture. I saw the ceiling. And I understood why they left or slept. When I awoke, I was on my knees. The being was gone, but the artifact pulsed with a steady rhythm, like a heart. Miriam later told me, "They're waking up, not all only the ones who remember." For the first time, I understood we were not excavating ruins, we were unsealing memory. And the reawakening of the 120,000-year cycle had already begun, leaving that chamber with the echo of the being's voice still reverberating inside me. I understood that nothing I had learned up to that point would help me interpret what I had found. Archaeology's tools, brushes, chisels, cameras had crossed a boundary, the line where physical record becomes living memory. We needed another instrument, resonance, listening, a method that allowed real dialogue with what was awakening. Back at the camp, the team was split between skepticism and a kind of primal dread none of them dared admit. Some abandoned the project entirely. Others received veiled warnings, career incentives, or simple intimidation. Only 3 of us remained. Myself, Miriam the acoustics specialist, and Omar, the materials physicist who trusted almost nothing except what he saw with his own eyes. Together, late at night, we reproduced one of the artifact's main frequency patterns. When we did, the entire tent responded, not just the device. The walls vibrated, the sand shifted in waves. A harmonic resonance filled the air, aligning with our heartbeats. The visions returned, clearer this time. The artifact projected sequences of sound not as noise, but as syntax syllables of a language we couldn't speak, but whose intention we could feel. Miriam mapped them into a spectrogram and found structure, repetition, grammar, rhythm. This wasn't artifact noise, it was speech. Each illuminated symbol corresponded to a sonic pattern, a word that invoked a function: building, healing, calling, remembering. Some sequences altered the mineral composition of nearby stones, changing how light refracted through them. This wasn't mere writing, it was functional language system capable of modifying reality itself. It became clear, these beings didn't record memories in books or carvings. They imprinted them into matter. Material became memory, memory became signal, signal became language. And I began to understand why the chambers were awakening globally. But outside our tent, the world wasn't idle. Strange leaks began appearing online. Blurry photos of lights over Siberia. Drone footage of desert fissures glowing at night. Inuit elders reporting voices in the ice. It was as if the global veil was thinning. Not because of Uzbat, because of the cycle itself. At the same time, suppression increased. Academic databases wiped Paleocontact research. News articles vanished. Publications on ancient anomalous isotopes were taken down. A coordinated silence rose like a dark tide. Then, unexpectedly, we received a visitor. Her name was Anan, archivist, who had once exposed irregularities in archaeological missions and lost everything. She arrived with a bag of microfilms and the haunted look of someone who had seen too much. "They don't want us to remember," she whispered. "But some of us keep copies, bare." Inside her files were accounts dating back more than a century, field notes from missionaries, classified military reports, journals from explorers, all describing elongated beings, harmonic chambers, and structures that responded to sound. Not isolated myths, echoes of a suppressed history. With Anne, our research network grew. We mapped global patterns. The chambers aligned with ancient migration routes, magnetic nodes, and mineral-rich tectonic seams. These beings didn't choose locations randomly. They built on Earth's memory points, the energetic organs of the planet. Genome analyses revealed something even more alarming. Residues from the chamber contained genetic expressions unlike any terrestrial species, not mutations, not evolutionary branches, engineered biology. Humanity wasn't alone on this planet's evolutionary tree. We were a younger branch growing in the shadow of an older one. Then came the greatest revelation yet. took one night while decoding a new frequency sequence. The artifact emitted something different, not an instruction, a story, a narrative encoded in vibration. It described an era long before human emergence, a population that guided ecosystems with resonance, a breakdown in planetary harmony, a protocol of retreat and dormancy, and a promise: when the young can hear, we will return. The chambers weren't tombs. They were libraries, sleepers, beacons awaiting listeners. But awakening them came with risk. The frequencies they emitted altered biological and geological states. Reactivating these memories could heal ancient fractures or destabilize systems humanity didn't understand. As global anomalies intensified, we began receiving offers, international agencies wanting access, collaboration, or complete silence. The pressure mounted. The three of us barely slept, and then it happened. At 2:14 a.m., the sky above the camp ignited with a soft, silver haze. It pulsed, slow, rhythmic, mirroring the artifact's beat. Miriam grabbed my wrist. "It's responding," she whispered. In that moment, I realized we weren't discovering anything. We were triggering something designed to awaken. I closed my laptop and sent our preliminary findings through encrypted channels to trusted contacts. I knew the consequences. There was no going back. As the sky dimmed, the ground emitted a single long pulse. The same frequency echoed hours later from sites across the world. The cycle had restarted. A planetary memory was stirring, and we three humans in a desert were at the center of a reawakening older than civilization itself. In the days that followed, nothing returned to normal. Not in the camp. Not in my mind. The world seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something it couldn't name. Global magnetic readings climbed steadily. Anomalies appeared in places that rarely drew attention: mountain ridges, glacial caverns, deserts, deep forests. Every pulse traced back to the same harmonic blueprint as our artifact. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, sensations returned, synesthetic flashes of sound and light, as if someone were tapping on the edges of my consciousness. Miriam monitored the instruments obsessively, documenting oscillations that violated physical expectations. "They're synchronizing something," she murmured, her voice trembling. But the key realization came not from our sensors, but from the silence. The kind of silence that precedes storms, battles, revelations. The first event happened shortly before dawn. The horizon darkened unnaturally, as though the desert had swallowed the sun. Then a column of bluish light rose, smooth, precise, modulation identical to the artifact's rhythm. 2 short pulses, 1 long, 3 short. A perfect match. The artifact levitated from the table, glowing bright as a star. Miriam gasped. Omar froze. My eyes filled with involuntary tears. Not fear. Recognition that light wasn't a signal. It was a reply. When it disappeared, the desert fell quiet again. But it was no longer the silence of emptiness. It felt inhabited, like the air itself had awakened. That afternoon, the artifact activated once more, projecting symbols into the air, floating lines of light that twisted and folded until they formed shapes we recognized. Coordinates, dozens of them, locations around the planet. The chambers were awakening in sequence, like a global organism rousing from hibernation. Military helicopters arrived within hours, enclosing the area under heavy guard. The same officials who previously shut us down. They spoke with urgency and fear not of what we might do, but of what was coming. "You don't understand what you've triggered," their commander said. But there was something else in his tone: knowledge, a familiarity he wasn't allowed to admit. I realized then, some institutions had always known. That night, while soldiers argued over containment procedures, the ground shifted. Not a tremor, a heartbeat. A deep, resonant pulse that vibrated through bone. The air thickened, the sand rippled. The chamber below us answered with a harmonic surge. The entity was stirring. The artifact glowed violently, brighter than ever, its pulse synchronizing with the earth itself. Then the moment came, the one that would redefine everything. The crystalline pillar in the chamber cracked. Light burst from within, not blinding, but warm, ancient, intelligent. The being stepped free, not emergent, not reborn. Awakened, it stood easily 3 meters tall, with elongated limbs and an aura that distorted the air around it. Its skin refracted color like mineral under pressure, and its eyes deep inclined. Unhuman did not glow, but shimmered like the reflection of distant stars. The soldiers froze. No one fired, no one moved. The being didn't look at them, it looked at me. And in that gaze, something inside my mind unlocked an aperture widening to let in a flood of memory that wasn't mine. It spoke without sound. You heard. Now you must remember. Visions poured through me, cities of living architecture, luminous corridors, ecosystems sculpted with vibration. I saw beings crossing harmonic gates. I saw Earth as it was 120,000 years ago, in an era we were never meant to forget. I saw the rupture, a catastrophic event, not geological but vibrational, tearing their civilization from the cycles it once controlled. They sealed themselves, protected their knowledge, waited for the young species to develop the capacity to listen. When I collapsed to my knees, the being was already gone, but the chamber thrummed with renewed life. The artifact's pulse matched my heartbeat. Miriam knelt beside me, tears in her eyes. "They're waking up," she whispered. Not all just the ones who remember, but it wasn't the beings she meant. It was humanity. For the first time, I understood that the chambers weren't vaults of the dead. They were archives, seed vaults of consciousness. Anchors for a planetary memory older than any written history. We were not in the ruins of an ancient civilization. We were standing at the threshold of a return. The cycle 120,000 years long had begun again. After the entity awakened, nothing inside me felt the same. My thoughts, my memories, even my dreams were no longer entirely my own. It was as if a door had opened inside my mind, allowing fragments of a world far older than humanity to flow through. I was no longer witnessing history, I was remembering it. Governments moved quickly. Helicopters roared overhead day and night. Armed forces surrounded the site in expanding rings. Communication lines were cut. No one left, no one entered. But containment was a fiction. The frequency had already spread. The ground vibrated with a low rhythmic heartbeat, matching the pulse of the artifact. Earth itself seemed to be humming slowly at first, then with gathering strength as though it had woken from a sleep too long. I dreamed nightly, dreams not born from the mind, but delivered into it. In them, I walked through cities made of living, light-towering structures that shifted like organic crystals. Corridors breathed like lungs. Energy flowed like water through veins of luminescent stone. The being's tall, slender, ancient, moved gracefully, communicating not with words, but resonance. Their gestures tuned the environment. Their footsteps changed the air. And as I wandered their world, a realization grew in me like dawn. These were not visions, they were memories. Echoes of a time when Earth was tended, shaped, cultivated by a species far older than ours. Then came the darker memories, the rupture, the vibrational wound, the collapse of harmony, a planetary dissonance, and the choice the ancient ones made to seal their cities, their chambers, their own bodies, not to survive, but to wait for us. I woke, drenched in sweat, chest tight, mind echoing with frequencies that didn't belong to human biology. Meanwhile, around the world, The anomalies multiplied. Seismographs recorded pulses from locations with no fault lines. Glaciers emitted harmonic booms. Animals migrated in spirals. Auroras appeared in latitudes where they had no reason to exist. Tribes in remote regions spoke of the old ones returning. Children reported dreams identical to mine. The cycle wasn't local, it was planetary. Then, one evening, the most extraordinary event occurred. The sky shifted subtle at first. Then, with unmistakable presence, clouds dissolved into a metallic sheen. The wind stilled as if anticipating an arrival. Even the sand felt heavy, as though gravity itself were listening. Gah! At the center of the site, the ground opened with surgical precision, not exploding, not cracking, but unfolding. Rock layers arranged themselves into geometric petals, revealing a massive, pulsating structure below. It resembled a column of translucent flesh and mineral, breathing with deliberate rhythm. Each pulse sent waves across the desert floor harmonic, intelligent. From the column, patterns of light rose shapes, symbols, constellations from unknown skies. It was a living archive, a biological library. Then a figure emerged, smaller than the first entity, but unmistakably of the same lineage. Its body refracted light like layered crystal. Its movements were fluid, as if gravity obeyed its command instead of the reverse. Its eyes deep, elongated, held not judgment, but ancient recognition. The soldiers pointed their weapons, but their hands trembled. None fired. How could they know human instinct for attack could override the presence of something so profoundly before us, being drifted toward me, not walking but gliding, as though carried by sound we couldn't hear? When it stood before me, an overwhelming calm washed over my body, not forced, remembered. A hand-long, delicate shimmering reached toward my chest. It didn't touch, it resonated. Thoughts that weren't thoughts flowed into me. The cycle returns. The lineage awakens. The veil lifts. Then the rupture I had glimpsed in visions became clear. A cataclysm not of fire or impact, but of resonance. A discord so powerful it fractured their civilization's harmonic bond with the planet. They sealed themselves not in fear, but in protection of Earth, of life, of the future beings who would emerge. Us. The being withdrew its hand, and something broke open inside me. A barrier I hadn't known was there. A boundary between human memory and planetary memory. In an instant, I saw the Earth before humanity. The Earth guided. The Earth tended like a garden. The Earth singing. And then the Earth wounded, cut by dissonance, scarred in ways only they could understand. When I collapsed, Miriam grabbed me. Her face was wet with tears. "They chose you," she whispered. "You're the listener." The bridge. The being returned to the pulsating column. The structure contracted, descending back into the earth. The stones folded shut. Silence reclaimed the desert. Bet it wasn't the same silence. It was the silence after a message has been delivered. The soldiers fell to their knees. Omar muttered prayers in languages he barely remembered. And I knew with absolute clarity that history had ended. A new chapter had begun. These beings were not myths, not gods, not invaders, not watchers. They were the primordial inhabitants of this planet, the architects who shaped Earth across cycles longer than human civilization has existed. They didn't return to rule. They didn't return to guide. They didn't return to punish. They returned because the planet called them. Because the wound they left behind was opening again. Because the era of forgetting had ended. That night, as I wrote the final line of my journal, my hand trembled not with fear but with reverence. We are not discovering the past. We are stepping into it. And for the first time in my life, I understood the story of humanity has barely begun. The old world is rising. And we, whether ready or not, are rising with it.